Okay, for this assignment, we will be creating a small cityscape using a CAD software called Onshape. Onshape can be a little tricky if you have never used anything like it before, so make sure that you're following step by step so that you don't get lost. To get onto Onshape, I'm probably going to have a link somewhere on the assignment that will take you to Onshape. If you are just going to type it into the URL, you just need to make sure to type in jordandistrict.onshape.com. It's not just Onshape. If you go to there, you won't be able to sign in under my account. You're just going to sign in with Google using your student email, so click on that. And you're going to get to a page that looks something similar to this. All your files get automatically saved, and they should be present at the bottom right around here. If you've never made a model before, then you're not going to have anything there. So to create a new document, you make sure that you're in the Documents tab, go to the Create button, and click on Document. For this assignment, we'll just call it Cityscape, something along those lines, and press create, and this will make your first document. Now, some quick camera controls. They're going to be very similar to other CAD software if you've ever used something like Tinkercad. To rotate the camera, if you're using a mouse, you're going to hold that right click button and move your mouse around, and that will rotate the camera. If you're using a touchpad, that will be pressing down with 2 fingers on the touchpad and moving that around. To pan the camera, you are going to hold down on the scroll wheel and move your mouse around. If you are using a touchpad, that will be pushing down with 3 fingers on the touchpad and panning the camera. And then to zoom in and zoom out, you scroll with the scroll wheel or 2 fingers not pushing down on the touchpad, and you're going to zoom in and zoom out. The camera will zoom in wherever your cursor is. So if my cursor is way over here, it's going to zoom in over in that direction. Okay, so that's a little bit of how to get oriented. Now you'll notice that I can't quite get this thing like rotated exactly in that 30-degree perspective that I want. That's where this cube comes in handy. So you can actually click anywhere on this cube, and it will like automatically turn to that perspective. You can also like rotate the camera, turn it this way and that way. So this cube is really beneficial, especially when you're trying to make sketches. I'll explain what that is in a little bit. On our left-hand side, we're going to have our geometry. This is also kind of like a history list. It basically shows all the parts that you have in your work plane. So you'll notice by default, we have 4 things in our geometry here. We have our origin point, and that's right here, this teeny tiny little dot. And you'll notice when I hover my mouse over the origin point, it actually turns orange in the view right here. The origin point is helpful for constraints and other things like that. We don't necessarily need the origin point for this assignment, so if I wanted to hide that, you can just click on this little eyeball here and that will turn it off. We also have these different planes right here, so if I hover over each one, they turn orange respectively. As far as the planes go, you can kind of imagine these almost like infinite floating tables in the sky. How Onshape works is first you have to draw a 2-dimensional sketch first, and these planes are very handy for drawing those 2-dimensional sketches. You can offset a sketch if you need it to be a certain perspective. So if I go to like this front plane, I right click and I go to offset sketch, we can offset it 1 inch, we can go into the negatives, and you'll want to learn for future reference how to position these planes for future sketching as needed. Now you'll notice I've made another item here, this plane 1. If I don't want that anymore, I just left click it and it turns a solid orange, and then I can press the delete button or the backspace key to erase that object, and that's for any object in here. Okay, so let's start with our first sketch. The goal at first is we're just going to make a very basic skyscraper altogether. So we need to create a square skyscraper that is 2 inches in width, and we'll get to the extruded part later. So to make a sketch, just click on the sketch button up here at the top left, and then it says select a sketch plane. So I have to tell it what plane I will be drawing this 2-dimensional sketch on. Now, right now, I don't have any real geometry. I only have these imaginary floating planes in the sky. So let's just click on the top plane, and you can see that I have this rectangle now that says sketch 1, and I also on the left hand side see that I'm inside that sketch 1. You can tell you're inside an item when it is a solid blue color. So I'm going to click on this top perspective for the cube so that I'm turning the camera looking at it, and in sketch 1 you'll notice that the toolbar has kind of changed because I'm inside a sketch, and I need to make a square skyscraper that's 2 inches in width. So let's just make a square first. You'll notice this corner rectangle tool right here. I can click on there and make a second center point rectangle, an aligned rectangle. These are basically just like how you are creating the shape itself. Let's just go with the default corner rectangle. So to make a corner rectangle, I can left click to make my first point, and then move my mouse over and left click again to make another point. And now it is this gray colored shape right here. I have actually sketched a square. If I wanted to move this around, first I would make sure that I'm not having the corner rectangle tool selected anymore. So I will click on that, and you'll notice my cursor turns back to normal. You can also press the escape key to do that. If I wanted to just change a couple things about this square, I could click on one of these points and drag it and manually change the sizes. If it's blue, it hasn't been constrained to anything, so you're free to manipulate it as needed. Now, a lot of students think that they need to draw on this actual plane. That's not the case. I can highlight everything and just have my sketch way over here. The only thing that this square is for is just to show you what you're sketching on. So it's not like, oh, I have to sketch it on top of this, okay? So I've done a 2-dimensional sketch. If I was to 3D print this out, nothing would show up because it is a 2-dimensional shape. It has no depth to it. So I want to grab this square and pull it out into the 3rd dimension. That button is called extrude, and the extrude button is going to be at the top left right here. It's this small square with the big square right behind it. If I click on extrude, by default, I only have one shape in my sketch, so it assumes I want to extrude this square. If I rotate the camera, you can see that it's trying to pull this 2-dimensional sketch into the 3rd dimension. It wants to pull it out by default at 1 inch. How far do we want to sketch this out? Extrude it 4 inches. So I can click on this arrow and try to drag it up to 4 inches, or on here on the depth, I can just type in 4 and press enter, and it will automatically scale it. Now, one problem that I notice a lot of students run into is sometimes on the extrude window right here, it's trying to extrude the surface, which could be a problem. Do you see how my square is hollow right now? If I was to hit this green check mark and try to print this out, it wouldn't print out because it's just extruding the walls. There's like no thickness to the walls. And so we want to extrude it as a solid, not a surface. So the cool thing about Onshape and these items on the left-hand side, if I want to go back and edit something, I can just double click on that, and then I can edit those specific things. For instance, I have no idea how big this square is. So when you're in your sketch tool, you can click on this button right here called the dimension, and we can tell Onshape how big we want this to be. In this case, we want this skyscraper to be 2 inches. So I can click on this dimension, and I can say, I want this edge to be 2 inches. So I can press 2, and it will automatically scale that down to 2 inches. Now, obviously I don't need to do this edge because it's a square and these lines are parallel, but I do need to set this edge. So right now, this edge right here is 1.81 inches. Let's just scale that up to 2, press enter. And then when I press this green check mark, everything else stays the same. Okay, so now let's go and fix this extrude right here. I can double click on this extrude one. And by the way, you can tell what sketch is what and what extrude is what because when I hover over it, it highlights it in orange. So I can see sketch 1 is where I drew that square. Extrude 1 is where I extruded that square out. So if I double click on extrude 1, instead of surface, let's just make that a solid. You may need to click on that square just to extrude it. But now you can see that it's a solid instead of just the edges there, and we have extruded it 4 inches. So yes, if I was to print this out, I would get a rectangle that is 2 by 2 by 4. So the next step that we want to do is add a second tier that is 1 inch in width and extruded 2 inches, okay? We'll want to verify that it's in the center of our first tier. If you're not sure what a tier is, think of like a wedding cake. Each one of those layers is a tier. So now I'm gonna click on the sketch button again, but instead of drawing on these planes, I'm gonna click on the top of this shape that I've drawn. You can only sketch on a flat surface, so if you're trying to sketch on something like a cylinder, you'll have to sketch on one of these planes and then extrude it out as needed, or you can offset the plane like I showed you earlier. So let's click on that, and now you can see that I'm on sketch 2, and sketch 2 is sketching on this surface right here. We need to make another square, so let's just draw the square. We'll center it and do the dimensions now. So click on the dimensions, and I want this to be 1 inch by 1 inch. Okay, if we want to verify that this is in the middle, I know that this square is 2 inches, so we're supposed to have a 1/2 inch on each side of this square. Instead of just using the dimension tool to set the size of an edge, I can set 2 points for a dimension, and I can say I want the distance between these two areas to be 0.5. So now I know that it's 0.5 between these two areas. I can also say I want it to be 0.5 between these two areas. And so now I verified that this thing is right in the middle of my first tier. Let's extrude this out. We need to extrude it 2 inches. So I will click on the extrude button again. Instead of 1 inch, let's do 2. Make sure that it's on solid instead of surface. And we've extruded our second tier. It's looking a little more like a skyscraper. Let's just add a couple more details here. We need to create a roof using the chamfer tool. Instead of going into a sketch, we can actually edit the geometry here using a couple tools as well. So what I want you to focus on is both the fillet tool and the chamfer tool. If I was just to select a face right here and press this fillet tool, it's automatically going to round this off, assuming it doesn't break the geometry. So you'll notice that the fillet rounds off all of those edges, and I have a little arrow here that I can like move. But when you look at these middle edges here, when it gets to the point where they when they intersect each other, it kind of breaks the geometry. Onshape kind of doesn't like that, and it gives me the error with these red edges. And so you'll want to play with the values to see like how much you can get away with almost before it breaks, or you can put in the value right here, and so you can kind of like play around with them, scale it to what you want it to be. But we don't want to do a fillet tool, we want to do a chamfer, and a chamfer is exactly like the fillet tool, but instead of rounding off the edges, it makes it like a hard 45-degree cut right there. And it's the same thing as the fillet tool. If I do it too much, so right now this is at a 0.3 inch fillet. If I do it at like a 0.7, it'll probably break the geometry because those lines will intersect. So you'll want to play around with these values, get it to what you want it to be. I like the 0.3, so let's just do a 0.3 just to kind of make that roof shape on our skyscraper. Next, we need to make a round lightning rod in the center of this roof. So I'm going to sketch on this plane right here. And instead of using the square corner rectangle tool, let's use the center point circle. And this is to make more round shapes. You can also do like a 3-point circle. If you want to make more of an oval shape, you can use the ellipse tool. Let's just do the center point circle, kind of line it up in the middle of this, and then I will drag it out. Now it's a lightning rod, so it doesn't need to be too big. We can actually use the dimension tool just like we did for the squares, but for a circle. So I can say I want the diameter of this circle to be 0.1, and it will automatically scale it down to there. Okay, as far as the lightning rod, it doesn't say how long we want to extrude this, so I guess it's dealer's choice. Let's click on the extrude button. Let's make it nice and tall. Perfect. Okay, so we have our lightning rod. Next, what we want to do is cut in a door for the entry that is 0.5 inches tall, 0.3 inches wide, and 1 inch deep. So we're actually going to cut into this building. Let's do a sketch on one of these faces. We'll just make a little door to go into it. So click on sketch, going to click on that surface, and let's make another corner rectangle. I want my door kind of more over here. Now, one thing I wanted to point out before I solidify this choice to make a rectangle, do you see how this bottom line changes orange when I move my cursor over it. That's because I'm going to constrain that edge to this edge as right here. And you'll notice that right here, this edge is no longer blue, it's black. So if I hit escape and go back to my regular cursor, I can move these points around because they are blue still. They're not constrained to anything, but I can't take this edge off of that bottom part because it's been constrained to that. And that's one of the reasons that I had you turn off the origin point at the very beginning, is because a big problem that a lot of students run into is you are constraining things to that origin point accidentally, and then you're getting flustered because you're not sure like why you can't move your sketch around. Well, it's black. It's been constrained to the origin point. So if you don't want to worry about that, just turn off the origin point. Now we need to set the dimensions of this door. I want it to be 0.5 inches tall. So let's turn this edge 0.5 inches tall. And you'll notice that this top bar is black now too, this top edge. And it's because since this bottom one is already been constrained, and I've set the dimension to be exactly 0.5 inches, I can't stretch this out anymore because it has now been constrained to where it's supposed to be. I can still move these side edges around, but not after I set the dimension of this part. So I want this to be 0.3 inches. And now we can't change the size, but we can slide it left and right if you want to. But like we can't change the size of this because we've solidified it. We've constrained it with these two dimensions, okay? So I want to make a door, and you're gonna make the door just like you made your second tier and your lightning rod. Click on the extrude button, and by default, it will assume, okay, pull this out 1 inch. And this is where you say, no, I don't want you to go out 1 inch. I want you to remove. So instead of add, we're clicking on remove. And by default, it does it 1 inch. Let's say, hypothetically, if you wanted to extrude this or remove it more, you can use this arrow or change these values. We could even cut our skyscraper all the way through, so we have a back door to this skyscraper. But let's just change this to 1 inch. That's just fine. And press this green check mark to solidify that we are done. And I already pointed this out earlier, but look at our left-hand side. Do you see how as we are making this geometry, we have a lot of new items? So let's say if I wanted to go back and change this chamfer, if I move my mouse over the chamfer 1, it highlights it orange, so I know exactly what that item is. And if I wanted to change that, I can just double-click on it and go back into that chamfer 1. Let's say I actually want this to be a steeper roof, so let's make that 0.4 inches, and that will make it a steeper roof like that. Okay, the next thing we want to do is design a company logo on the skyscraper that is extruded out 0.1 inches. So instead of sketching just squares, rectangles, circles, and ovals, you can actually design your own shape to be extruded out. So let's go back into the sketch tool, and I want to sketch on one of these faces. It doesn't matter where. Let's do it on the front door though, at least I'm going to. And I'm on my sketch 5 right now. And this time, instead of using the corner rectangle or the center point circle, let's utilize the line tool and the 3-point arc tool. So let's just say this is a very family-friendly skyscraper. Let's just make it into like a heart. So to make a heart, I'm just going to use the line tool, and you can click to make 1 point, move it down, make another point, move it up, make another point, and then to make the two humps of the heart, let's use the 3-point arc tool. And the 3-point arc tool is you set your 2 points first, and then you can choose the angle that this gets curved to. So maybe do it right here, do it right here, do it right there. Okay, one thing that I wanted to point out about Onshape is it absolutely will not extrude singular lines. This has to be a complete shape, completely closed off before you extrude it out or remove any shape. So going back, let's just zoom in super close. And this is a problem that a lot of students run into. Let's say these 2 points are not touching, like they're so close. And when you're zoomed out, it looks like they're touching, but we know that they're not. If I try to hit this extrude button, it's not going to work. It's going to extrude this tiny little part where those two lines intersected, because yeah, that in there is a solid shape. There's no breaks in it or anything like that. So that's a big problem. So you need to make sure that all of your points are connected because it's a solid shape. I noticed like a lot of students also try to, like, let's just let's just do an M for Mr. Minear. If I was to extrude this M, try it out, it won't work because it is not a solid object. If I wanted to extrude out an M, I actually have to go in and make it into a actual shape and make sure that all the points are connected. Now when I hit the extrude button, it will extrude out those two shapes, and you can also remove them away from shapes as well. So if you want to select what shapes you want to be extruded and leave out what shapes you don't, simply just left click on the shape and it will cancel it out. Like let's say I don't want the M, I just want the heart. Deselect the M, click on the heart. Now I want to extrude these out 0.1 inches, so let's just change the value to 0.1 inch, press enter. You can press the green check mark to say that you are all done with that extrusion. So our skyscraper is really coming together. Now play around with it, add any other features that you want your skyscraper to have, experiment with it. That's the best way to learn a new software. And now we need to name this part skyscraper. So down here at the bottom, you're going to see these tabs, kind of like if you were having a bunch of tabs open when you're on a browser. This is Part Studio 1. I'm going to right click on Part Studio 1. Let's rename that skyscraper. Okay, we're all done building this part. Now, Onshape works by creating a bunch of different parts and then assembling them all together in an assembly. It's very modular that way because you have all of these things that you can go back and change. We're going to divide our assembly up into a bunch of different parts so then we can change those as needed. So to make a second part, what we want to do is make a second part, a flat rectangle that is 10 by 10 by 0.1. I'm going to click on this plus button, go to Create Part Studio, and now we're going to sketch a simple flat square. So I'm going to go into my sketch, click on this surface here. Let's just make a square, and we'll use the dimension button to make this 10 inches. So that's going to make it quite big. Make this also 10 inches, and we want to extrude it out 0.1 inches. And it's just going to be a super flat square. And we want to rename this second part block. So right click on this tab, change the name to block. And now we have two parts. I have my skyscraper and I have my block. Let's put these together in the assembly tab. So in the assembly tab, instead of sketch, you have this insert button. Click on insert and you will have a block. So let's place our block. Just left click to select where you want that to be. And you have your skyscraper so you can move your mouse. Now we are going to constrain these together. So it's not like you have to try and like aim it exactly on top of this block where you want it to be. Just click anywhere right there. And how we attach these two things together, how we constrain them, it's called mate. And so there's a lot of different options to mate these things together. I want to do a planar mate. So picture two faces. I want to mate this bottom part to the top of this block. Picture the faces like the palms of your hand. When you clap your hands together, we are mating those two surfaces together. So when I'll click on the planar mate here. It's asking me, okay, what surfaces do you want to mate together? Move my mouse over this face right here, and it is now selected in like a yellow. Then I want to select on this surface here. Press this green check mark to solve, and now we can exit out of our planar mates now. So now when I click on this and I use these arrows, I can slide it still around, but I can't lift it up off of this surface. Like these two are on the exact same plane now. So I can still manipulate it using the planar mate. I just can't like remove them from each other. I can even like slide this off of it, but I can't lift it up on its own because they've been constrained together. Okay, so let's just position our skyscraper. I actually want to, let's move our skyscraper over here, and then you can use this icon right here to rotate the skyscraper. Let's just rotate it like 90 degrees and just kind of line this skyscraper up. Okay, so that's basically how assembly works, is you're bringing in your shapes. Now let's say if I wanted to go back and let's say this antenna looks too long, I can just go back to my skyscraper, go back to that extrude. Where was that skyscraper? Right here. Double click on the extrude. Instead of 0.2 2.3 inches. Let's change that to like 1.5 inches to make it a little bit smaller. And that will be reflected in the assembly tab. It's going to be a shorter antenna right there. So now what I want you guys to do is you're going to design your cityscape with at least 3 other complex structure parts and arrange them into your assembly. So right here, you're just going to click on this plus tab, make a new part, design your own building, and put it in your assembly. You're going to make a little city block with at least 3 other structures. So in total, you should have a cityscape with your block and 4 structures total, including this skyscraper that we built together. So when you're all done, to how you submit this for assignments and for prints that you will be 3D printing, we want to export this assembly out. So to export, you go to this tab right here, right click on the export button. Now by default, your setting is going to be, the format's going to be on Parasolid. The slicing software for 3D printers really likes it in STL. So you're gonna click on format, go down to STL, and another thing that is pretty picky on is the units. Now I think by default, yours might be in meters. Click on that, change it to millimeters. And I know it's kind of confusing because we have been designing our 3D model using inches, but for some reason, if we change our units to inches and turn it into give it to the slicing software, it's going to be not the right size. So we need to change the inches to millimeters, even though we built our model in inches. Give it a file name, maybe your first name, last name, Cityscape, something like that, and everything else looks good. Click the export button and it will download that file to your downloads. Then you're welcome to go to your assignment and submit that STL file.